So for more insight on what we can see this morning and what it all means, let's turn to Jamil Jaffer. He's director of the National Security Law and Policy Program at George Mason University and former chief counsel and senior advisor for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Jamil, thank you again for being with me. We are hearing that this is in motion and could take place at any moment. We're looking at live pictures, of course. This is Gaza City Square, some call Palestine Square there. You see Hamas flags. You see a lot of civilians gathered in anticipation. How do you expect this second hostage exchange to unfold?
Well, Shannon, what we've seen over the last few hostage exchanges, there was a major one a few months earlier in the conflict, and then obviously one last week. And typically what happens is you have the hostages handed over to the Red Cross, and then they're brought down to the Kerem Shalom border crossing there from Gaza into Israel, where they're then picked up by Israeli vehicles and then transported into Israel itself. And then there are points at which they're able to meet their families, and we see that connection happen. That's what we saw happen last time. We'll likely see something similar again.
Exactly. I do believe, again, these are live pictures from Gaza City. You can see a vehicle with the International Red Cross symbol on it. Also split screen, I believe that's live pictures, correct? Control room of the families waiting for the hostages to be released. They are watching, of course, this all unfold live. And these are four very young female Israeli soldiers, 20 years old. One is only 19 years old, Liri Albag. We have 20-year-old Karina Reeve, 20-year-old Daniela Gilboa, and 20-year-old Nama Levy, who are expected to be emerging and exchanged at this time. Again, Jamil, this scene that you see the soldiers there with arms, this is a process that so far seems to be going rather smoothly. What are your thoughts as you're watching this unfold?
Well, look, a 15-month battle has, I think, worn down both sides, and I think patience is worn thin in Israel with getting the hostages back. Obviously, what happened on October 7th was atrocious. It's the equivalent, Shanley, of a dozen 9/11 attacks on a population-adjusted basis. So if you think of what we in the United States went through on 9/11, and then multiply by that by 12, and you have a sense of what the Israeli population went through. But even more than that, if you hear about what happened on that day and you read the accounts and you go visit those sites that I had a chance to do about a month ago, it's really just the barbarity and the depravity of what these terrorists did to young women and men and the people they kidnapped, and the way they treated them in those moments is just appalling. And so you have this real sense that the Israeli people want their hostages back, in part because they don't want this to continue to torment them. At the same time, the Israeli government rightly wants to see Hamas destroyed and taken to pieces for what they did and what they may do in the future. And so, what we'll see now after these hostages are handed over and after the next sort of 7 to 8 weeks happen and the full exchange happens, there will still remain another 60 hostages there in Gaza. Both Israelis, Americans, other foreign nationals. And the real question is, how do you get those back, and how do you come to some sort of longer-term settlement where Israel can be assured its security and the Palestinian people can get the aid they're looking for from the international community?
That's right. That's a key part of the ceasefire agreement. 600 aid trucks per week, I believe it is, during this process, much needed in the Gaza Strip that has just been decimated over the 15 months of war between Israel and Hamas. But this picture I'm seeing, the video I'm seeing, still after 15 months of war, Hamas, the terrorist group, seems to still be a show of force, much still together. Is that something that you feel is maybe a bad sign for what Israel and the optics of this ceasefire deal will ultimately end up meaning?
Yeah, look, this is part of the challenge. Hamas controls the aid trucks when they get into Gaza, and so it's not like the aid is going directly to the people of Gaza. What's happening is Hamas is getting it. They're giving it to their fighters first. And then they're using it to recruit young people and saying, hey, look, you want food for your family? Come join Hamas. Commit to us a year or 2 years of service. And so, it's not just, they're, the Palestinian people in Gaza are affiliated with Hamas because they want to. It's essentially a mafia controlling, a terrorist mafia controlling, 2 million people. And so the Israelis are aware of this. And so, but it's very hard to figure out how do you get the aid into the hands of the people that need it, while at the same time not empowering the very terrorist group that's conducted these attacks. They're then taking those things, selling them to people within Gaza or trading them, and then eventually trying to get weapons smuggled in. When we were at the Kerem Shalom border crossing a month and a half ago, you see all the contraband being smuggled in. A lot of it, interestingly enough, is cigarettes. Cigarettes are going for a huge premium in Gaza during this conflict, and they smuggle cigarettes in otherwise, regular aid material in the side linings of the boxes and the like. And so it's a real challenge. And so we'll see how this proceeds forward. But at the end of the day, the better resolution for all sides is to get the conflict over with, get the hostages back, and then figure out what some sort of a settlement looks like.
Exactly. And for the families of the hostages, can you even put into words what they may be anticipating or feeling in these moments as they watch their family members released?
I can't even imagine what it's like to have your 19 or 20-year-old daughter held for 15 months by brutal terrorists. Just imagining the horror of what she must be going through, even if it's just captivity. But you imagine what other horrors might have been visited upon any of these young women, and it must be debilitating for the families. And now to get them back, obviously that's just the first step in the process, getting them back, and then helping them recover and return to any sort of normalcy. I think will be a years-long process for the young women and their families.
Absolutely. World Health Organization saying these hostages could suffer, lifelong consequences from their time in captivity. And again, for those just joining us, we are looking at live pictures of Palestine Square or Gaza City Square, where we have civilians and militants gathering for this exchange of 4 female Israeli soldiers as the second wave of hostages are released in this first phase of the ceasefire agreement. And I know, Mr. Jaffer, you can also see these live pictures as you're watching. Is anything standing out to you?
Well, I think obviously you see people with weapons there, and I think that's part of the challenge, as you've rightly pointed out. We know that these groups are still armed and still have capabilities, and that's going to be something that the Israeli government's going to be closely watching. There's no doubt that they're watching who's in the square, identifying these individuals. Obviously, some of them are covered up, and identifying who the fighters are, and then maybe following them even as they leave and trying to identify where they're going. And so part of the challenge here, if you think about the real challenge about fighting in Gaza and fighting Hamas, is that these are terrorists who don't care for the rules of war, who don't care for the civilians of Gaza, and so they hide their weapons orders in schools and hospitals. And so when you see these Israeli forces going into these schools and hospitals, it's not because they want to take out schools and hospitals, it's because that's where Hamas is putting their fighters, putting their weapons, and knowing that they will gain world support for every civilian that dies. And so it's in Hamas's incentive to have Palestinian civilians die, because they gain notoriety and they make the Israelis look bad. And that's how they gain support, by putting their own civilians on the line. And this is sort of the laws of war and the laws of modern conflict are designed to deal with a force that intentionally puts its own civilians at risk. They assume that a nation state or a government that controls the population wants to protect its civilians. That's just not true for Hamas. They see benefit in Palestinian civilians dying.
Right, and in these videos that we're seeing, I see like a stage set up. There was a podium, I believe, in one of them at one point. Again, and I'm seeing it reported uniformed Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives out there in the square here as well, and we see cars, vehicles lining up. This could be happening at any moment. Now, I recall last week it got a little agitated there in the crowd happening. Israel warning Hamas to have a little smoother transition for safety and security reasons here. But we're seeing this happening as well. But what do you believe is happening in Israel and with Benjamin Netanyahu in coordinating and communicating as this process unfolds?
Yeah, well, obviously, there's the other question of the transfer of the 200 detainees from Israel as well. As you and Trey Yinks pointed out earlier, they're trading one female soldier for 50 Palestinian detainees. These are 30 of each of these group of 50. So roughly 120 of these detainees will be people who've gotten life sentences. And as a prosecutor, Shanley, you know how hard it is to get a life sentence in a judicial proceeding. And so these men who are being released, almost all men, if not all men, are murderers. They're terrorists. They're people who have actively plotted attacks, killed people. And so I have no doubt that this is a frustrating outcome for the Netanyahu government and for the people of Israel. And I think we'll see how this plays out. But at the end of the day, that is the deal that's been put on the table, a deal that's been agreed to, and this will continue now. This is the second of a series of about 6 or 7 or 8 releases that will take place over the next series of weeks, one a week, until the 33 hostages are gone. But remember, it's also important to note there is still another 60 or so hostages. Many of them, we believe, are dead. So about a third of the roughly 90 hostages that remain in Gaza are suspected to be dead. So there's really about 60 living individuals. These 33, some combination of them maybe dead, but we believe that the bulk of the 33 are alive. So by the time this is over, about half of those who are alive remain alive will be returned. The deal does involve the return of both bodies and living hostages.
Right, and I know there's a lot of hope and a sense of relief, as Trey said, in Israel, that this does, we see this to fruition. A big factor in, of course, reaching this ceasefire deal in the first place, the timing, again, with the new administration here in the United States, with President Trump and the first exchange of hostages here. I'm sure him and his administrators and his advisors are up watching these live photos as well. How do you think they may respond as we see this unfold?
Well, look, I think there's no doubt that Hamas was watching carefully the U.S. presidential elections and the outcome of that contest, and now the taking of office by President Trump with some trepidation. I think they recognize that President Trump will come down substantially, as an American leader should, on the side of the Israelis against the terrorist attack. I mean, again, you just have to think back to 9/11, and I know for a lot of your listeners up today, a lot of them lived through it, a lot of them were around for it, some of them were young enough to not even experience it. But if you imagine the shock and horror and anger amongst the American people on that day, multiply that by a dozen, you have a sense of what happened in Israel. And so, we fought a 20-year war. We went around the world and we chased down al-Qaeda terrorists around the globe to keep our people safe. And so, to give you a sense of what the Israeli population is going through in just the last 15 months. So while it does appear that we're coming to an end of this conflict and that everyone hopes that peace will come to pass, there's no doubt that the Israeli government, the Israeli public, will continue to, as we've seen them do for decades, hunt down every single last leader of Hamas. Just in the last 15 months, they've killed the leader of Hezbollah, they've killed the leader of Hamas, they've killed the operational leaders, they've killed senior Iranian leaders, they've essentially decimated Iran's air defense capabilities, Syria's air defense capabilities. So the Israelis have had a lot of counterterrorism successes as a result of this conflict, I think, and put a lot more damage on Hamas and its fellow terrorists, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the like, than I think anybody could have imagined at the beginning of this conflict.
Absolutely, Jamil, and also a week of a ceasefire, giving Hamas over the last 7 days or so a chance to come up for air, reorganize, and look, we're watching live photos there in Gaza City of a Hamas militant taking the stage. Looks like they were maybe signing something. What do you think was happening there?
Yeah, that's hard to know. I do imagine that Hamas is going to use this opportunity as a propaganda victory. Say, look at these Israelis handing over 50 of our toughest guys, 30 of them life sentences for each female soldier. And the hard part about these trades, and these have happened many times over the years. One of the most famous ones back in the day, Gilad Shalit. And you see these large handovers of prisoners. Hamas knows that by taking hostages and by kidnapping Israelis, they can gain back a lot of their people. It creates all the wrong incentives, and yet it's hard to. It's when you think about the position of the Israeli people, the position of the Israeli government, you can't imagine any way but getting these hostages back, and so you've just got to do what it takes. But making these trades and making them at such large multiples does incentivize exactly the wrong kind of behavior on these militants. So I don't doubt that Hamas will use this as a propaganda victory along with its people and say, look at what we've gotten back. Look, now you're able to go back to your houses, and look at these houses that have been destroyed by the Israeli government. What they fail to mention to the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza is, it's our fault. We did this to you. We caused this to happen to you. And actually, we want to put you in harm's way. We hope the Israelis come back and kill you because we think that gains us prestige on the world stage and harms the Israelis. So, that's I think the real challenge of this whole situation is the people of Gaza are caught in the middle between a terrorist group that wants them to die and an Israeli government that says we've got to get Hamas out of here and get the weapons out of their hands so it can't kill more Israelis.
And again, we are looking at live pictures. You can see on your screen a split of what we were just talking about with Jamil, the Gaza City Square, Palestine Square, where we are anticipating the hostages to be released. We did see the International Red Cross trucks just moments ago arriving there as well. And then on the other side of the screen, live pictures of the hostages' families, the 4 young, brave Israeli soldiers, female soldiers, who are, here we go. This looks like this is it, Jamil. Let's listen in live as we see these 4 young women be released from Hamas after 15 months in captivity.
يا حبيبي انزل يا حبيبي.
And there it is, incredible pictures from Gaza City. The 4 female Israeli soldiers are now in the custody of the International Red Cross after spending more than 570 days in Hamas captivity after being kidnapped on October 7th, 2023. This is the second wave of a 6-week hostage exchange, phase 1 of this ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Wow, Jamil, Jaffer, still with me. Jamil, these young women look to be in good spirits, raising their hands in victory as they took the stage with cheers from the crowd there. Yeah. What's your reaction?
Yeah, look, they do look well. They look like they, at least in the last few days, have been fed and they were given appropriate clothing, and so. At least as of right now, we'll learn a lot more about what happened to them in their 15 months in captivity once they get back. And they're able to sort of recover, but at least they look good now. I do want to note as we look at these pictures on the left with all these militants. I think the most noticeable fact here is that all these militants have their faces covered. Right? This is how we're dealing with a terrorist group. Right? Soldiers generally don't cover their faces. These are not soldiers. These are terrorists. If anybody has any questions about what these people are, that's how you know.
That's right. No doubt.